You're listening to Dairy Voice by Dairy Business News, a podcast exclusively for the dairy industry.
One of our sponsors of the Dairy Voice podcast is National DHIA. NDHIA ensures information accuracy and represents their members' interests. They are the direct voice for the dairy information industry. To find out more, go to dhia.org.
If you raise calves, you know you can't prevent stress, but you can give your calves the boost they need to rise above challenging conditions. Nurture Boost is a uniquely formulated feed additive that supports calf lung health and enhances overall immunity to elevate your calves' ability to withstand stress. Boost your calves for better performance at boostyourcalves.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in your day. Welcome to the Dairy Voice podcast by Dairy Business News. I'm your host, Connie Kuber, with Sealpro Silage Barrier Films by Connor Agriscience. Thanks for joining us today. Please like, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends. Check out our past episodes too. We cover a large number of topics, and I think you'll find something that you'd like to listen to. It's hotter than a pistol, as my brother Dennis would say, in the San Joaquin Valley where I'm at. And before you say, well, it's a dry heat, which it is, our forecast for this weekend wavers between 117 and 120. Arizona is its normal furnace, and I've checked out the temperatures in the Midwest and the West and down in Texas, and everybody is just hot. The topic of our podcast today is heat stress, which is very relevant. So my guest is Steven McDonald with Agpro, 5G Consulting, and Delta Livestock Construction. We're going to talk about how to help get your cows through this summer heat.
It's time to look for more from your animal nutrition provider, and more is exactly what Purina delivers. When you choose Purina, you can be confident knowing you're helping your animals reach their fullest potential. Visit PurinaMills.com to figure out how you can get more from your feed company.
So welcome, Steven, to the Dairy Voice podcast. Let's warm up by having you introduce yourself.
Very fitting. And we make dairy equipment, waste equipment, cow cooling equipment specifically. I have worked in the past with 5G and Delta Livestock Consulting and dealing with animal welfare and how to make construction meet the needs of the cow. So that's something that I'm very familiar with. But you are correct. It is hot everywhere, and it's something that we have to address every year. And I would say that these discussions probably need to happen in March and February to really get as much benefit for, the farmers have to start looking at this very early, but the discussions in the middle of the season definitely come home when it's 117.
Yeah.
Goodness sakes, that's like the Middle East.
Well, thank you. Let's just put it real basic first. What is heat stress in cattle, and what are the signs of a cow that's in heat stress?
Well, of course, heat stress, simply put, is the point to where cows are hot to the point of affecting their milk production and reproductive efficiency.
Right.
That is really start measuring that. And normally for a cow, somewhere around 68 degrees. So you can imagine at 117 that she is in severe heat stress. And as THI goes up and all the measurement metrics that we use to determine where she is in that heat stress, as those go up with the ambient temperature, it's very, very important to address this. That's heat stress in a nutshell. Get a little more detailed with that. That's a little bit longer conversation, but I think it's important to recognize that cooling that cow individually is probably the first line of defense for heat stress. And I say cooling her individually, I mean specifically soak. Of course, everyone in California is very familiar with soaking a cow. There are places in the U.S. that don't normally soak, but I believe that they are losing production because they do not. Even when their summers are shorter than some in the South, even in places Northeast and Northern Midwest. Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota and even up as far as Canada, there still gets hot, and those cows still see that heat stress point pretty much all day. Now they do cool down at night. I think if you're not cooling your cows, you're losing money.
What does life on the cutting edge mean to alfalfa grower Dan Sheps?
Harv Extra has been very consistent on our test results from first crop through fourth crop. The higher quality has allowed us to feed less byproducts and feed more alfalfa haylage in our diet. And cows are able to have a higher intake with a higher quality forage.
Hear more of Dan's story at harvextra.com.
What kind of numbers, what kind of data can we look at as far as amount of production lost on average?
Well, of course, that varies from farm to farm, but I think a typical number that has been used for years and years and years is somewhere between 6 and 8 pounds of milk, what I would call recovery in the summertime. As cows go further into heat stress, they start dropping milk production, and over the course of the summer, they can lose as much as 10 to 12 pounds in some cases. But I think on average, 6 to 8 pounds is a realistic number, which means that when you soak cows, and as they do a lot in California, they see these numbers regularly, you will keep them from dropping that extra 6 to 8 pounds. That doesn't mean they don't drop any at all. It just means that the amount you're able to recover on the bottom end of that drop is at 6 to 8 pounds normally. Now, we've seen places that have done way better than that and have recovered 10 to 12 pounds, as I said, but those farms are very tightly managed. The tighter you get that management, the more you're able to cover in that.
And you talked about fertility. Tell me about that. What do we see there?
There was a study back in 1983. We're basically a 3% reproductive efficiency recovery again. So they drop reproductive efficiency as they get hotter. If you can save 3% of whatever that drop is, then at that time it was worth $75 per cow annually. Now, if you put that into perspective to today's numbers, what's the difference in dollar value? Not only that, but how much better have we improved our technology, not only with housing facilities and with cooling techniques from 1983 to improve that. Now, to put an exact number or an average on that, I don't have any university data. That I think intellectual world has accepted that it is absolutely necessary to cool the cows to save that reproductive efficiency. I can give you the numbers of the farm that we actually did a set of our smart soakers on last year. And without mentioning the farm, but I can tell you that his numbers in 2022, he had a 12% reproductive efficiency at the worst part of the summer. We put in fans and soakers for him in 2023 in the middle of June. His lowest reproductive efficiency last summer was 21%. So that's a 9% increase. Apply that to that 3% number from 1983, he tripled that, right? So that the systems paid for themselves in that 3-month span. Severe heat stress that he had. That's without giving his exact, personal information. That was a real success story, we believe. I think every farmer should be looking at that. And I know that they do. They know more about the performance of those cows than we do. It's extremely interesting to me how cows are able to cope, but if you give them just that little bit of extra cooling, they will absolutely pay you back.
You mentioned fans. So fans are an important part of this whole thing. And is there a sizing that you prescribe for fans for barns that you work out for people?
Well, we do. We look at, so it depends on the type of barn. Obviously, if you're looking at a cross vent or a tunnel vent barn, those confined spaces, air exchanges they are the most important piece of that to make sure there is the right amount of, and in a lot of cases, more fresh air coming in than is necessary. I mean, in that particular scenario, there is no minimum as far as I'm concerned. The more air you can get through that barn, the better off you are.
Right.
That's one thing. thing. If you're looking at a natural vent barn and you're looking at air speed over the beds and over the headlocks and looking at the cows' actual cooling, they have plenty of fresh air. Now you're looking at coverage and what those fans can actually cover and how to place the fans in order to get the best coverage. Then you look at electrical draw and horsepower and the efficiencies there in order to try to recoup the money that you're spending on electricity and make the system as efficient as it can be. If you look at our fans, we have big fans and very big coverages with our fans in a natural vent scenario. And we also have big fans and big exhaust capabilities. We can handle a lot of static pressure and a lot of airflow with very few fans comparative. That's a very in-depth discussion to get into that part of it, to be able to make sense of all of those data points. Probably take us a while to go through that in depth.
We had talked about soaking. Let's talk about water usage. Like out here in California, we're on a very limited water supply. What can I do? Or the other thing is, if I have too much water, I can't put any more into my system. So that helps with this. Tell us about what your suggestions are for this.
So our smart soakers, for lack of a better term, an adaptation, the system piggybacking off of the traditional soaker system. We have developed a soaker that will not spray unless the cow is present. It detects the presence of the cow and soaks her according to whatever time delay and or on-off cycle that you decide to set in the system. It's completely adjustable. That particular setup saves at least 70% of the soaker water that would have been used.
Get your Sealpro silage barrier film today. Protect the seed, fertilizer, labor, and expensive inputs that you've invested in. Choose best-in-class Sealpro now in 3 different versions: traditional 2-roll application, our new co-rolled application, and super simple and wildly successful 1-layer film, Sealpro 1. It's easy to buy, easy to use. Contractor covering? We'll work with them. Learn more at sealprosilage.com. That's SEALPRO silage.com. Family owned and operated for over 25 years. 559-779-5961. That's 559-779-5961. 70%, 70.
At least.
Wow.
And it completely depends on what the original setting on the traditional soaking system would have been.
Sure.
But some farms soak far more aggressively than others. For the reasons that you mentioned, they either are leaking in water, cannot supply enough, or they don't have enough room in their lagoons, or they don't have enough ground to go to with the excess water for irrigation, or they have to haul it a long way. There's a lot of factors there that make disposal very expensive. We're reducing that by a huge amount, but we're also seeing good numbers comparable to the traditional soakers in production and reproduction performance. In fact, the numbers I gave you earlier from the farmer that had the 12% repro efficiency and then jumped to 21, that was actually a farm where we put in smart soakers. Those are numbers from the data that he collected and gave to us. We're seeing really good results. We also have a study going on with the University of Florida right now. They did a study with us 2 years ago in summer 22. And what they found then was, just for reference, the numbers on their study at that time were their control group, heat stress group that had no fans and no soaking. They were only looking at water troughs, and they use 168 liters per cow per day. The conventional soaking group, again, soakers and water troughs, total water usage was 469 liters per cow per day. The smart soaker group, which was soakers and water troughs, was 148 liters per cow per day. So that was close enough 20 liters per cow is not enough to call a big difference, but that was close enough to basically say that the control group and the smart soaker group were basically the same. And those are numbers that Dr. Jeffrey Dahl put together and actually published last year. That was a study that he did. Now they have expanded that and are doing a larger study with several more barns and several more parameters to the study. There were more numbers to that in regards to dry matter intake, breath rates. Oh my goodness. And right off the top of my head, I don't remember all the criteria that they were looking at, but in every one of those criteria, the smart soakers performed just as good, if not better, than the conventional traditional soaking group.
Right.
So we were right there with our numbers. And I think it is a testament to allowing the cow to choose when she is able to cool herself and not be completely reliant on obligatory timing that we normally set up for a soaking system.
Right.
In other words, if she gets up out of the bed and she's hot and she wants to go soak, but the timer that is running has just gone off, she has another 5 to 7 minutes or whatever the dry time may be to wait until that water comes on. With the smart soakers, she goes and stands under a soaker and it soaks her immediately.
So tell me, what does it look like? What does the smart soaker look like for our listeners who've never seen it before?
So the smart soaker is a backpack looking, for lack of a better term, it almost looks like if you remember on Predator, the thing on the back of his head where it looked like a horn coming off the back of his head, but it's a saddle that sits on top of the pipe, and the sensor is on the bottom between the pipe and the headlock, and actually senses it. It's an ultrasonic sensor. It's the same sensor basically that's in the bumper of your pickup that tells you when to stop before you run into the wall. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's basically the same, but it's looking for an obstruction between that sensor and the floor in the cow lane.
And so how wide is the band that reads?
It spreads out as it gets closer to the floor and will read wider. The further away from the sensor, the wider the area is. It depends on how we set it up. We can change the settings to be more sensitive, to be a little bit wider, to be more narrow, to be more. It depends on how each farmer wants to set the system up. They have a way to do that works best for them. We normally set those on revenue cows. We recommend setting soaker every other headlock. So basically every 4 feet.
So that it senses whether there's an animal there. And if there is, it turns on the soaker in that spot.
Yes.
So if I'm going to install this, can I use my existing soaker setup and just adapt it?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
It'll go right on any setup. We can make the spacings 4 foot, 5 foot, 6 foot, 7 foot, or 8 foot. We can make them any spacing you want. Depending on which group of cows you're cooling may determine a wider spacing. In other words, dry lot cows who are going to be choosing the shade in the heat of the day over the headlocks, over being right underneath the soakers, you may only want to put them at 8 foot. They're not going to spend a whole lot of time there unless they're locked up. Revenue cows in a freestall that are going to be up and down and in there with fans, and you want to give them every opportunity, those high producing cows, to cool themselves. We recommend the 4 foot spacing. So there's everything in between, but it will adapt to any pipe setup, 2 inch, 3 inch. The only thing that may have to be changed on a situation is if the pipe placement is too low. Some areas it's very close to the cow. In that particular situation, it needs to come up because of the sensitivity range on the soaker. There is a dead spot right underneath the soaker. So we've got to get above that dead spot so that it can sense what's below it. But that's all technical mumbo jumbo that we can handle when you design a system.
Right. So how do you maintain these units?
The recommended maintenance is to wipe them off and clean them off 2 to 3 times a season. Spread out. There needs to be somebody watching them, as your breeding guys and feed guys and health guys come through the barns. pay attention to what's working, what's not. If there's anything that needs attention, you attend to it. It basically has just a few parts that are all modular and are easily changed out there. You can service a unit within a minute and a half, probably, if you know what you're doing. Each one of those they're very easy. You got a solenoid and a sensor and a computer board in it, and that's it.
Okay.
And it's not difficult at all. It's not maintenance free either. You have to be paying attention and make sure it's working. Saving you 70% of that water that's an expensive commodity to get rid of, well, then it's definitely worth doing.
What's the warranty on this?
So the soakers come with a 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Depending on the issue, if there's an issue, we'll work with the customers to make sure it gets fixed. If it's normal wear and tear warranty things, well, then we swap them out parts and they take care of the install. Pretty cut and dry.
So is there a monitoring system that I can see what's going on for my Apple or Android?
The monitoring system, if it's hooked up to Wi-Fi, it's called the Barn Boss. Can get on anywhere. It is web-based, has an IP address, and you can access it from anywhere you want to, but it does have to have a Wi-Fi connection, obviously. You can look at settings, you can look at water usage, you can look at issues. It'll tell you which units are working, which units are having issue, with the whole gamut. It's way more complex than what I'm technically qualified to handle. Kind of like run an Excel sheet, I can run an Excel sheet, but I guarantee you, I don't use all the little perks on the Excel sheet that exist. So,
well, that's okay. Sounds like it's a user-friendly unit.
It's very user-friendly.
Okay.
It works really good when changing settings. If you want to make an adjustment to the way what their timing is or how long they come on or off or whatever, it's really fast and easy to do that.
So do you have data as far as what the payback period is for this smart soaker?
I think it depends on which region that
Sure.
you're in. Right.
Right.
The further north you go and the shorter the season, a little bit longer to pay it back because it's not running for 7 months out of the year the way it does, in Dublin, Texas, or Florida, 365 in Florida. That's a little bit different. As I said earlier, if you're able to increase your reproductive efficiency 6%, then it easily pays for itself. Just
Right.
we're not even talking about milk production at that point, but reproduction, it pays for itself the first season.
Listen, we've been talking with Steven McDonald, talking about heat stress and how to mitigate that. We've got this new product called Smart Soaker. We've talked about the extreme need and the cost of heat stress. We've talked about how this product works and what it can do to help us. So, Steven, is there anything else that you'd want to add?
It's just extremely important to listen to your cows. It's amazing to watch the behavior change in these animals once they figure out that they can go soak whenever they want, and to watch them manipulate the system. We can set the system to soak for 30 seconds for instance, and they'll go soak and use that 30 seconds of water, and they figure out when it turns off, and they'll move forward and get another one and get them another 30 seconds of shower. So they learn how to work the system to their benefit, which I think is a huge plus. And I think that for that reason, we get more efficient cooling on them because they know what they need better than we do.
Is there a website that people can go to check this product out?
agprousa.com. If anybody has any questions, they can absolutely call me. It's 254-734-5268, and I'll answer any questions.
Well, thanks very much, Steven, for joining me today on the DairyVoice podcast. We've been talking to Steven McDonald of Agpro. I'm Connie Kuber with the Sealpro Silage Barrier Film by Connor AgriScience. You've been listening to the DairyVoice by Dairy Business News. Please subscribe, like, and share this podcast with your friends. We're concerned for the cows during these hot summers, but please be aware of the signs of heat exhaustion and heat stroke for yourselves as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again very soon.